Here we go. Last day of taking this bike apart. Sometimes you'd think by watching me work on a motorcycle I've never done it before. I had a hell of a time trying to get this front axle out. This stand has definitely been pretty handy while working on the bike. For as much as I'm always wiggling on this bike and yanking it around, it hasn't really seemed like it's going to come loose. And even when I'm really pulling on it to try and get these front forks out, it was fine. I just had to push it back into place. Now that I got this front end up on the table, it's a little bit easier for me to finish taking it apart. I'm an idiot. I should have kept the pinch bolts tight on the one side of the forks, so that way when I'm wrenching on the axle, it's actually backing it out of the threads instead of just spinning it. I don't think I've ever had the proper tool to take a steering stem nut off. I've always just hit it with a hammer and a screwdriver. I haven't ruined one of these nuts just yet, but there's always time. The steering head bearings ride on these little metal rings called races. That's what's pressed into the steering tube, and I'm trying to bang out. It's kind of a given that I'm going to have to get new ones of these. Pretty much any bearing that's on this bike, I'm going to try and find a new one of. Sometimes I wonder what the designers and the engineers were thinking when they were building this bike. There's a lot of stuff that has to come out in really strange orders, and a lot of bolts that would come out a ton easier if the frame was just in the tiniest bit of a different place. But with enough wiggling and banging, everything eventually comes out. This is one of those parts that I've been thinking about. I'm not really sure if I want to powder coat it black or red. In my painting it was red, but I've also seen it black on other bikes and it looks really good. You know, I'd assume that if I wasn't trying to film this whole thing, I could probably get the whole bike taken apart in about a day. This big aluminum linkage has been one of those parts I've had my eye on. I've been thinking about maybe trying to design one and CNC it. It's a relatively easy part to get at, so for now I'm probably just going to take it to the Scotch-Brite wheel and polish it up a little bit. Just about every rubber grommet on this thing is going to need to get replaced. They're all pretty ripped up and dry rotted, and the grommets on this part are no different. I have thought about 3D printing them and then molding and casting them out of rubber. I don't know how much they would hold up any better than the OEM ones that come straight from Ducati though. I don't particularly love these side mount things. When I look them up on the internet and find aftermarket ones, they're called a rear set. This is also a part that I've been thinking about trying to CNC my own of. I don't anticipate having passengers on this, so I'm not worried about those passenger foot pegs. And then I can make a separate mount that would hold the mufflers. I just think by splitting up the two parts, they'll look nicer. So I wasn't really using my brains on this one. I probably should have just hunted for the master link and unclipped it, instead of pulling out the chain breaker and going at a random link like a bat out of hell. I even ended up breaking the little pin on my chain breaker. Good thing I had a spare, but it was still stupid. One of the downsides of this stand is that it doesn't really let me take the frame off of the engine or drop the engine out of the frame. The way it works is there's a big Delrin part that the frame rests on, and there's also this little steel pin that goes into this hole over by the swing arm. So now that I want to separate the last two parts of this bike, I need to play Jenga. I'm going to do my best to build a platform to hold the weight of the engine in the frame, and then I'm going to slide the stand out. I think under normal circumstances, I probably would have just lifted it off the stand and put it on the floor or a table. But since there isn't anybody at the shop to help me, this is how I'm doing it. Hey, look at that. This really makes me empathize with motorcycle mechanics these days. Like with my new Ducati, I had to change the battery because it died a couple weeks ago, and just trying to get that stupid thing out was a pain in the ass. And that bike is even more tightly packed in together than this bike. Back to this useless manual, trying to see if it tells me anywhere how to take the front frame bolt out of the engine, but it doesn't, so I hit it with a hammer. Why should I be surprised that I have to take the carburetors off to take the frame off? Seriously, looking at the bike, you would think that once you take a handful of bolts off, you could just drop the engine right out of it. But you can't. Everything's either bolted to the engine or interwoven in the frame somehow that I have to take it all apart. And now I gotta wiggle that carburetor out without knocking the whole thing off of my Jenga blocks. And then a bunch more wiggling. I've also been taking this bike apart out of the toolbox that I usually take to the motocross track to work on my dirt bike. And now that I gotta use these tools a bunch, I'm learning that I really don't love most of them. So I'm gonna be shopping for new tools. Hey, look at that, there's the carbs. Hey, and there's the frame. Now I guess the next thing up is what parts do I start to work on first? Thankfully the local Ducati shop is open and I can order parts. And the parts guy at that shop pointed me towards an engine builder who has experience doing older engines like this and might be able to start working on my engine. I'm guessing that taking this frame to get sandblasted and powder coated is probably going to be the cheapest and easiest part to start on. I hear there's another bike shop that's appointment only that does vapor blasting, so I might clean the swing arm up a little bit and then take this over to them. There's a funny little circlip on the swing arm pin that holds it all together. I guess I was expecting there to be a bolt and a nut. There's a lot of bolts and little rubber grommets all over this bike that need replacing. I've been scouring eBay and websites looking for places that have OEM parts. There's a lot of aftermarket parts, but not a whole lot for this particular year and model of Ducati. And the local Ducati shop over here, Pro Italia, they've been super helpful in trying to help me track down resources and help me get as many parts as are still available. Well, there you go. Whole bike taken apart. Sitting in bins, sitting on the table, sitting on the floor. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to finish this, but I got the first part of it done. So, thanks for watching.